May 13, 1977, Woodside, Queens, New York. Mickey Spillane said goodnight to his son, walked downstairs from his apartment on 59th Street, and stepped outside into the evening air. Someone was waiting in a parked car. Roy DeMeo raised his weapon and fired. Spillane, the man who had kept the Italian Mafia out of Hell's Kitchen for nearly 20 years, died on the sidewalk outside his own building. He was 43 years old. Nobody was ever charged. The case remains officially unsolved. But Jimmy Coonan knew exactly what had happened. He had arranged every detail of it, and in the weeks that followed, he believed he had finally won, that Hell's Kitchen was his, that the war he had been fighting since he was 17 years old was over. He was wrong. What came next, in a back room of a Brooklyn restaurant, would cost him everything he had just taken. To understand how the most feared Irish mob boss in New York ended up surrendering his independence to the very people he'd used to seize power, we need to understand three things: who Mickey Spillane was, and why Hell's Kitchen was worth killing for, why Jimmy Coonan hated him with a fury that lasted 2 decades, and what Paul Castellano said in that room that no one outside it was supposed to survive long enough to repeat. If this story is new to you, subscribe and stick with us. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Hell's Kitchen in the 1960s wasn't just a Manhattan neighborhood. It was a criminal empire generating millions annually through gambling, loan sharking, union control, and waterfront rackets. Mickey Spillane had taken over from his predecessor Huey Mulligan in 1960, inheriting a network that touched nearly every dollar moving through the west side of Manhattan. He controlled the unions at Madison Square Garden. Every fight night, every concert, every sold-out event generated invisible tribute flowing back to his operation. He controlled the longshoremen on the Hudson River docks, meaning every shipping container that moved through those piers carried a mob tax built into its handling costs. He ran the bookmaking and loan shark operations that covered an area stretching from 34th Street to 59th Street, from 8th Avenue to the river. He was called the gentleman gangster, and the name wasn't irony. Spillane preferred negotiation to bloodshed. He sent flowers to neighbors in the hospital. He provided turkeys to struggling families at Thanksgiving. He had married into political respectability. His wife Maureen was the daughter of the Democratic district leader who had run the Midtown Democratic Club since 1905. In a neighborhood built on violence and poverty, Spillane maintained his power through a combination of genuine community respect and the constant, credible threat that crossing him meant consequences that no amount of political connection could undo. Here's what made his operation genuinely remarkable. The Italian families who dominated organized crime everywhere else in New York stayed out of Hell's Kitchen while Spillane was boss. Not because they couldn't have taken it by force. They outnumbered the Irish mob 10-1. They stayed out because Spillane had found a tactical genius in the kidnapping racket. When Italian mobsters tried to move in, Spillane's crew would snatch their people, hold them for ransom, and return them when paid. It was an aggressive, humiliating, and highly effective deterrent. The Gambinos and Genoveses did their calculations and concluded that Hell's Kitchen simply wasn't worth the cost of a war against men willing to kidnap their made members in broad daylight. That calculation was beginning to change by the early 1970s. The Jacob K. Javits Convention Center was being built directly on the west side, Spillane's territory, and the construction contracts and union kickbacks it would generate were enormous. Fat Tony Salerno of the Genovese family wanted that money badly enough to reconsider the cost of war. He authorized the assassination of 3 of Spillane's top lieutenants, Tom Devaney, Eddie Comiskey, and Tom Capados. All 3 were killed between late 1976 and January 1977 by a freelance hitman named Joseph Sullivan. Spillane, who had moved his family out of Hell's Kitchen to Woodside, Queens, years earlier because the threats against his children had become too real to ignore, was losing ground on both sides simultaneously. The second threat was younger, angrier, and motivated by something the Genovese family never could have manufactured: pure personal hatred with roots that went back more than a decade. James Michael Coonan was born December 21, 1946, in a 5-room walk-up apartment on West 49th Street. His father, John, ran a small accountant's office on West 51st Street. The family was middle class by Hell's Kitchen standards, which meant they had slightly more to lose than their neighbors and exactly the same ability to protect it. In 1964, when Jimmy was 17 years old, Mickey Spillane's crew kidnapped John Coonan, pistol-whipped him, and beat him severely. Spillane ran this kind of operation regularly against local merchants. The kidnap for ransom racket was standard practice. The victims ransomed back to their families once payment was arranged. For most families, it was a terrifying but survivable ordeal that ended with a payment and an unspoken agreement never to speak of it. For Jimmy Coonan, it became the organizing fact of his life. He dropped out of school that same year, started fighting in the streets, and dedicated himself to building enough power to make Mickey Spillane pay for what had been done to his father. He was 5 feet 7 inches tall, stocky, with broad shoulders and a thick neck, an amateur boxer whose temper other criminals described as genuinely dangerous even by Hell's Kitchen standards. Within 2 years, still a teenager, Coonan had obtained a fully automatic machine gun, climbed to the roof of a tenement building, waited for Spillane to appear on the street below, and fired an entire 30-round magazine at him. He wounded nobody. Spillane survived without a scratch, but he understood immediately what kind of problem he was dealing with. He went directly to Coonan's father, slapped him around, and told him to control his son. The attempt backfired spectacularly. Coonan went to prison in 1967 on charges that were plea bargained down to manslaughter, released in 1971, and came out more focused than before. He started building his crew systematically. The most important recruit he made was Mickey Featherstone, a Vietnam veteran from the neighborhood whose combat experience and psychological volatility made him extraordinarily effective at violence. Featherstone had been found not guilty by reason of insanity for a killing in 1971 and spent time in a psychiatric ward receiving injections of Thorazine. He was baby-faced, blonde-haired, deceptively calm in appearance, and capable of switching to lethal action in an instant. Together, Coonan and Featherstone launched a years-long campaign of terror against anyone loyal to Spillane. They kidnapped and murdered his supporters. They took over his rackets, street by street. They made life in Hell's Kitchen so dangerous for anyone who stood with the old boss that Spillane's operation began to collapse from within. But Spillane was still alive, and killing him directly was a problem Coonan could not solve on his own. Spillane was still recognized by the New York Commission, the governing body of all 5 Italian families, as the legitimate boss of the West Side Irish. Moving against him without Italian backing risked turning every family in the city against a gang that never numbered more than 20 members. Coonan needed a partner with the weight of a major family behind him. He found one by way of a man who needed him just as badly. Roy DeMeo had grown up in Bath Beach, Brooklyn, and by the mid-1970s had become the most prolific killer operating under the Gambino family flag. The FBI would eventually estimate his crew responsible for at least 70 murders. He operated out of the Gemini Lounge on Flatlands Avenue in Brooklyn, whose backroom investigators would later describe as a systematic killing operation. DeMeo had a gift for violence that was genuinely unusual even among professional criminals, and he had spent years making himself invaluable to his captain, Anthony Gaggi, and through Gaggi to Castellano himself. He paid tens of thousands of dollars weekly up the chain. He delivered results on every contract. He had built one of the most feared crews in New York. And yet, in 1977, Roy DeMeo still did not have his button. He was still technically an associate, not a made member of the Gambino family. After years of murder and earnings, Castellano had still not formally inducted him. DeMeo needed something dramatic enough to force the decision, a deal so valuable to the family that Castellano could no longer justify withholding the honor. Coonan walked into his life at exactly the right moment. The arrangement they struck was simple and mutually satisfying. Coonan needed Spillane eliminated. DeMeo needed his induction. The west side of Manhattan, freed from Spillane's control, represented millions in annual criminal revenue that the Gambinos could access through a compliant Irish boss on the ground. DeMeo brought the proposal to Castellano. Castellano approved, and on May 13, 1977, DeMeo and his associate Danny Grillo drove to Woodside, found Spillane walking near his building on 59th Street, and shot him dead. The man who had kept the Italian Mafia out of Hell's Kitchen for 2 decades died at the hands of the Italian Mafia, killed by the gunman his own rival had hired and paid for. Jimmy Coonan was now the undisputed boss of the West Side Irish mob. The gang that law enforcement and the press were calling the Westies was his. But Castellano had not arranged Spillane's murderous generosity, and the debt came due faster than Coonan had anticipated. The problem began with a body that wouldn't sink. Ruby Stein was one of the biggest bookmakers on the East Coast, closely connected to the Gambino family and to Castellano personally. Coonan owed him $70,000 in gambling debts, money he had borrowed and had no intention of repaying. Rather than pay, Coonan did what he always did. He lured Stein to the 596 Club bar in Hell's Kitchen, shot him, and had the body dismembered and dumped in bags in the water near Ward's Island. The plan fell apart within days. Coonan had forgotten to slit open Stein's torso to release the internal gases. The torso surfaced and floated to shore near Rockaway Beach in Queens. The murder was immediately connected to Hell's Kitchen, and Stein had maintained a black book, a coded ledger of every outstanding loan in his operation, worth hundreds of thousands of dollars in debts owed to the Gambino family. That book had vanished with him. When Roy DeMeo arrived with the message that Paul Castellano wanted to see Coonan and Featherstone at Tommaso's restaurant in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, both men understood exactly what it meant. They assumed they were being summoned to their own executions. Coonan did not accept the invitation passively. He assembled a team of Westies in a building directly next to the restaurant, armed with machine guns, silenced pistols, and grenades, with explicit orders. If Coonan and Featherstone did not walk out of Tommaso's within 2 hours, the team was to storm the building and kill everyone inside. Then he and Featherstone walked in. What greeted them in the back room stopped them cold. Seated at a horseshoe-shaped table was the full hierarchy of the Gambino family: Nino Gaggi, Carmine Lombardozzi, Joseph N. Gallo, underboss Aniello Della Croce, alongside a representative of the Genovese family, Funzi Thierry. At the head of the table, in the seat of absolute authority, sat Paul Castellano himself, Big Paul, the boss of the most powerful crime family in America. Coonan later told people that in that moment, he was completely certain he would not leave the room alive. The questioning began over dinner. The Gambino hierarchy wanted to know about Ruby Stein. Where was the black book? What had happened? Coonan looked across that horseshoe table at the most powerful criminal men in New York and lied without hesitation. He knew nothing about Stein's death. He had never seen any book. Nobody in that room believed him. Castellano accepted the answer anyway and moved to the real business of the evening. He leaned forward and delivered the verdict that would define the next decade of Coonan's life. According to Mickey Featherstone, who testified about this precise moment in open court in 1987, Castellano said, "You guys got to stop acting like cowboys, acting wild. You're going to be with us now. If anyone is going to get killed, you have to clear it with us." Then he had them move to the nearby Vets and Friends social club, where he spelled out the terms directly. "If you are ever called to Brooklyn," Castellano told them, "you come, no questions asked." The meaning was unmistakable. The Westies were now a subsidiary arm of the Gambino crime family. They would give the Gambinos 10% of all earnings. They would take murder contracts when called upon. They would operate within the Gambino structure and answer to it. The independence that Mickey Spillane had defended for 20 years, the defining characteristic of Hell's Kitchen Irish organized crime, the thing that had kept the Italian families at bay through kidnappings and nerve and sheer refusal, was finished. And Jimmy Coonan, the man who had spent his entire adult life fighting for the right to answer to nobody, sat across from Paul Castellano and accepted every term. Outside, the backup team was still waiting, still armed, still watching the door. 2 hours had passed and then some, but one of the Westies had decided to pour another whiskey and wait a few more minutes before going in. That single drink was the only reason Castellano and the entire senior leadership of the Gambino family survived the night. Coonan walked out of Tommaso's having gained exactly what he thought he needed. Gambino protection meant no rival family could move against him. The union connections the Gambinos provided opened revenue streams the Westies couldn't have accessed independently. The murder contracts were steady and well-paying work. For the next decade, the Westies functioned as the Gambino family's secret enforcement unit, Irish shooters deployed specifically because their lack of traceable ties to Italian families made prosecution harder. DeMeo received his button weeks after the deal closed. Formally inducted as a made man, the reward Castellano had dangled for years finally delivered because the Westie alliance had proven its value. But inside both organizations, the Tommaso's agreement was already creating the enemies that would eventually destroy Coonan. Agnello Della Croce, the Gambino underboss, had opposed the Irish alliance from the start. He believed that Italian mafiosi did not associate with Irish criminals, who he considered too volatile and too unreliable for a long-term arrangement. The rising capo Della Croce was mentoring. John Gotti, running the Bergen crew out of Queens, shared this contempt entirely. Gotti watched Castellano build his relationship with the Westies and stored it as one more piece of evidence that the boss had lost the instincts that kept men in power. When Castellano was shot 6 times on a midtown Manhattan sidewalk in December 1985, killed on Gotti's direct order, the Westie alliance died with him. And within the Westies themselves, Mickey Featherstone had never accepted what had happened in that back room. He believed Hell's Kitchen Irish should answer to nobody, that the independent Spillane had once defended was worth preserving, even if Spillane himself was gone. Every murder contract taken from Brooklyn, every time Coonan deferred to the Gambino structure, widened the fracture between them. The loyalty that had held through years of war against Spillane began to corrode year by year. The collapse came in 1986. A construction worker named Michael Hawley had refused to pay the Westies protection money. Coonan wanted him dead, but instead of handling it cleanly, he authorized something far worse. Hawley was shot by a Westie named Billy Bokun, who had disguised himself with a wig and fake mustache to look exactly like Mickey Featherstone. and the killing was done in front of witnesses. The gang then tipped the police that Featherstone was responsible. He was arrested, tried, and convicted of a murder he had not committed. He faced 25 years to life in prison for something he had nothing to do with. Featherstone contacted federal prosecutors. He offered them 2 decades of documented criminal activity in exchange for having his conviction overturned. Murders, extortion operations, union racketeering, the full internal history of the Westies and their arrangement with the Gambino family. He wore a wire into meetings. He recorded conversations. The information he and his wife Sissy provided was so comprehensive and so detailed that prosecutors had everything they needed to dismantle the organization entirely. In the fall of 1987, Featherstone testified in open court for 4 consecutive weeks. The man who had stood next to Coonan in the back room at Tommaso's, who had been his enforcer and his closest ally through 20 years of war and crime, destroyed him methodically and completely from the witness stand. In 1988, Jimmy Coonan was convicted under RICO, the same statute that had dismantled the commission of the 5 Italian families 2 years earlier, and sentenced to 75 years in federal prison. The Tommaso's agreement had not saved the Westies. It had simply delayed their destruction while stripping away the one thing that might have allowed them to survive it: the independence that made them genuinely difficult to prosecute. As an unaffiliated Irish gang, the Westies had been hard to reach legally. As a documented arm of the Gambino crime family, they became a RICO target the moment Featherstone opened his mouth. Mickey Spillane had refused to let the Italians in for 20 years. He understood in a way that Coonan never did that Hell's Kitchen's power came from its independence. The 5 families outnumbered the Irish mob by any measure that mattered. The only protection the Westies ever had was the credible threat of violence from men who answered to nobody, men whose actions couldn't be predicted or controlled by the Commission because they operated entirely outside it. The moment Coonan walked into Tommaso's and accepted Castellano's terms, that protection evaporated. He had traded the only thing that actually kept them safe for 10 years of partnership with an organization that was itself already under federal siege. Jimmy Coonan is still in federal prison today. He is 78 years old. His mandatory release date is June 1st, 2030. In a 2023 parole hearing, he told the board he was not the same person he had been. His lawyers cited his age, his declining health, and his record as a model prisoner. The request was denied. Hell's Kitchen, the neighborhood where his father's accounting office stood on West 51st Street, the streets he had fought for through his entire adult life, is now luxury apartments and restaurants. The 596 Club is gone. The West Side docks that generated Spillane's union income have been converted into parks and riverside promenades. The Irish mob in New York is gone. It ended not because a stronger enemy destroyed it from outside, but because its own leader, in a private room in a Bay Ridge restaurant in 1978, nodded his head and accepted the terms that made its end inevitable. "You're going to be with us now." He nodded, and that was the end of the Irish mob in New York.